Welcome to In Such a Time, conversations on Jewish life, leadership, and meaning. Each week, Rabbis Jonathan Jaffe and Leora Londy explore the moments, questions, and ideas that shape who we are and who we aspire to be. And now, for this week's conversation.
Welcome back to In Such a Time, and here Rabbi Londy and I today are recording on Purim, so Chag Purim Sameach.
I don't know if you can see people, but that's why I have glitter on my face. Getting into the mood.
For Purim, I'm dressing as someone who's kind of getting over a cold and has a bad throat. So my apologies for that as we're doing this. But we're also recording this now several days into the conflict with Iran, and with lots of news going on, both in our country and Iran and in Israel, and many of us in touch with family and friends. And so we wanted to just take a moment here in order to weigh in and just sort of check in on what are some of the thoughts floating around what's happening right now with Iran and with Israel. How does it connect to our Jewish lens? So I want to turn over to you first. And Rabbi, what's on your mind? What's weighing on you at this time?
You know, we keep thinking that we're in a post-war era after the war in Gaza ended, and feels like we've wrapped up kind of that chapter with the hostages all being returned alive or dead. And so when another war arises and we have to start checking in with our loved ones in Israel and, fearing what the response is going to be in America towards Jews, I think it's exhausting to be here again. And so at this moment, where I always start by saying I'm not a policy expert. I don't know if this war is a war that needs to happen. I don't know if it's a war that's going to change the structure and the balance of the world, but I'm certainly hopeful that the result of it will bring about freedom for Iranians, prolonged safety for Israelis, and I come at this subject with a lot of curiosity, a lot of questions, and just a lot of concern for all the people impacted, and just hope that it doesn't escalate into something that is irreparable in this world. So where are you?
Yeah, I guess one thing that's been really, really on my mind, I've been trying to pick at and understand, is that, as you know, I live sort of with in a foot, each foot in one world, and one foot is in a very Jewish Zionist frame, and with a lot of friends and family in Israel, and certainly here as well. And then I have an experience of growing up and having a lot of friends from the non-Jewish world, and watching how this plays out there at the same time. A kid I grew up with, and a kid, a loving woman my age who grew up with me in Hawaii, posted something online about like a picture of like hands in a heart shape, and saying like, "I'm so sorry, world. Like,
Mm.
we'll like we will like we'll be better one day," or like, "I'm so sorry, world. What like don't give up on us because we want peace too." And it made me think about, like, first of all, the idea that someone that I don't know if they could fathom the idea that there are those of us who hope that what's happening right now is ultimately a means towards peace. But it really made me think about, I want to like frame it this way. I think mm, the the point of misunderstanding, the blind spot, is equating peace and quiet. We often talk about
Mm.
like we need peace and quiet around these times. And that I think that, and this is something that from a Jewish perspective, I get like this resonates very deeply within me, is that you can do very unpeaceful things very quietly. And those things are often go unnoticed by the larger world, by the press, by if you're not really paying attention. And you can also do things um that are not peaceful in the moment, but are ultimately in the purpose of forging peace.
Yeah.
So I'll give an example. I feel as though, like, you hear from the leaders of the UN or world leaders, so they say we have to de-escalate. It's always de-escalation. We have to cease the violence. You always have to just make everything peace and quiet again. But for those of us who are really in the know, when you say, well, as Iran quietly puts 100,000 missiles in Lebanon pointed directly at Israel, that's done kind of quietly, right? And when Iran supports Houthi militia and supports Iraqi brigades as well, and Syrian, and props up Assad and creates a noose around Israel, that is something that's very loud for me, but I think for a lot of people out in the world is very quiet. And then when Israel responds, it seems as though, why are we doing this? Israel is the aggressor. Or you hear so much like why couldn't we have done this through negotiation? Why is there war again? Why is Israel always instigating these things? And I think that it's a basic failure to delineate between peace and quiet, and that Israel often doesn't have the luxury of doing things quietly, especially because the microscope is always on Israel. But I think there's a real blind spot by the West to understand that sometimes very unpeaceful things can be done very quietly, and that those things can often be more dangerous, like turning up the water temperature for the frog in the bowl, right up to a boil, that you need to respond to that. And I think there's a general lack of awareness.
You know, I've been thinking a lot about this in terms of I always like our conversations because I think we often talk about the same subject, but just from very different angles.
Mhm.
And
Said.
I think that one of the things that I and also ready to go crazy at any moment, because that is how you maintain your power. And coming from a Western lens, we're living now in a Western society that has been primarily diplomatically focused. I think it's very hard to understand why the Middle East functions the way that it does. It just speaks a different language. And bringing it down to the more interpersonal, not interpersonal, the more personal element of it, I one of the things that has really just struck me is the videos of Iranians dumbfounded with joy at the death of Ayatollah Khomeini, and just feeling for the first time that in so long that there's hope, that there's a possibility for freedom. And so again, even though I don't know what the prospect of this war is long term, if it's good for the Jews, if it's not good for the Jews, if it's good for the world, if it's not good for the world, I do know that in that one moment, people felt relieved that part of that institution that oppressed them as humans and as women and as thinkers and as free people was destroyed. And so I think it's interesting that we're speaking on Purim, which is so much about the imbalance of power and how you find power and how you take your power and how you go about in the world, embracing and finding it and being resilient and knowing that you are willing to do anything in order to hold on to that power. And so I just have a lot of inspiration from the Iranian people, especially women who have just literally put their lives on the line for what they believe in. And so I really hope that this moment is one that brings longer um, longer peace and calm and a sense of stability and predictability
Yeah,
for them.
the
And an
opportunity and
opportunity.
everything. Yes.
Yeah. So even though we don't always like the way that our president frames things and maybe not always may not always believe the reasons that he does what he does, I've learned that even if I don't appreciate the figure and I often don't respect the politics, sometimes the outcome of what is done is important and necessary.
I mean, I have a couple thoughts on that. And I think that one of the reasons why Israelis so much gravitate towards Trump is because he speaks Middle Eastern. Is because if you're talking about power and always pushing back,
That's all he speaks.
that's all he speaks. And that's a very Middle Eastern language. And that's a language that they get and they recognize and they see and might be more foreign to those of us living in the US. I think there's also my somewhat debating pushback on you is that I think that again with the sort of the peace and quiet narrative here, there's an unchecked danger, sort of an unaccounted for danger when Americans and American leadership constantly make threats and then don't come through on anything when it comes to it. And we can go through a series of decisions that have been made about this and how that's interpreted in the rest of the world, where there are some bad actors out there. And that once you say that there's a red line, that once you say like this has to happen, there has to be some sort of action. And here's my greatest critique of those who've come out and said, but listen, the criticism about this is really should be done through Congress and this is war. I completely, that is a really interesting, very deep debate. But for those who say, and I'll quote, I know Kamala Harris came out, Hakeem Jeffries, they're saying that, you know, we want, we can't have Iran to have nuclear weapons, but it can't be done through violence. It should always be done through negotiation. And no one in the press actually sits there and says to them, that sounds great. But what happens if you negotiate with them for years and years and years and they don't do it? What happens if they're still enriching uranium and putting it in the bottom of mountains, thousands of feet underground? And if they're still saying out loud all the time, hey, we're going to use this to kill America and to kill Israel, what do you do? There has to be a certain point. It has to be more than just saying don't. It has to be more than just saying red line. You actually have to, it has to be a stick.
Boundaries.
It has to
You're
be,
saying boundaries are real. They have to be.
the boundaries have to be believable. And that I think that there's been a real erosion of confidence that American diplomacy has anything to it, that it's not just completely feckless in its promises, and that people will never negotiate with you if they think that at the end of the day, there's no there afterwards. There's no consequence. I think that we've been leading the world largely. I think that this is a very Israeli thing to say. Is that like it is about power, certainly, and yes, the ultimate display of power is when you have the bravery not to use it, but the threat has to be there.
It's very hard as me I was gonna say, like, as a mom, as a Jew, it's very hard as me to comprehend that, because that is just not the way that I tick.
You
Uh,
parent, you have to tell your, I'm sure all the time with your
Completely
kids
tough.
say this.
I do,
And
and,
it's,
and I pay a price when I let the boundaries slide. Of course we do.
yeah,
I'm just saying that in what has been instilled in me, I always want to believe that diplomacy and goodwill work. I
likewise.
want to believe that, but I
And
know
sometimes it does, by the way.
either way, many times it does, and we also don't even know how many times it does. Like we're not even privy to that.
Yeah.
But I know because I've seen it with my own eyes, and I've lived there, that the way that you make anything move is by playing a power move chessboard. That is it. And so it's hard for me to um negotiate between those two parts of myself, of the idealist who hopes that we can lean into love and find commonality, and also say, oh, I got to take down my enemy. And I think that that is the balance. Like that is what it is to be a human in this world at this time. It's to not let evil corrupt you, because power can be quite corrupting, but to say, I want to blot out, going back to Purim, I want to blot out the evil. And how do I do that? What is the strategy for getting there?
Right. There's, of course, the section from Talmud with Bruria, where the rabbi says, there are these hooligans in town and they are bullying me, and I'm going to pray that they should die. And she corrects him and says, don't read the Torah to say that the evildoers should die. It's the evilness within them that we pray always that they are able to overcome that evil inclination and that there's good in them. And that's some mother's child too that you're talking about. And before you talk about destroying them, I think it touches on something else I want to say about sort of these different worldviews and coming from a very Jewish, very, very Israeli based worldview. I think that for a lot of my non-Jewish American friends, there is a basic optimism which I wish that I had. Optimism is to say that at the end of the day, we're all basically the same, and that people want the same things, and that if you cut through all of the noise, people want to have a good job, a safe environment to live in, opportunities for their kids to grow up, a better future for the next generations. And I think that part of living experiencing life in Israel is to realize that there actually are some people out there, like that the boogeyman does exist, and that there are some people who don't live by that. And that when we were talking with my 8th and 9th graders about this, of course, when you listen to that phone call from October the 7th of the Hamas young man calling his parents and saying, Mom, Dad, I killed 10 Jews with my bare hands. Mom, Dad, you'll be so proud of me. I'm so happy I killed 10 Jews. And the parents are crying and screaming in joy and, may God bless you. That there are people out there in the world who really, it's not about their own prosperity or their own health, their own security. There is a religious fervor that drives them. I think it was Elie Wiesel who said that when someone says they're going to kill you, believe them.
Yeah,
And I
you
think
should believe people.
this is a very Jewish thing. We have our ears perk up when someone says it like this. So when Khomeini says, I'm going to build a nuclear arsenal and I am going to bomb Tel Aviv, I'm going to put a clock up in the middle of Palestine Square in Tehran, and I'm going to count down to when Israel will be obliterated off the face of the earth. That's not hyperbole. It's not metaphor. Like, he means it. And I think that Israel acts as though they know that he means it. When you put 100,000 missiles on the northern border of Israel, they mean it. And the people on October 7th mean it. I think that a lot of Americans and the West have been lulled into this very naive way of thinking that everyone eventually is actually like us, sees the world our way. And if we just make things better for them, then they're going to hate less or cause less havoc and violence. And I wish I felt that way. But my experiences, especially in and around Israel, have proved the opposite to me.
Yeah, I'm not going to disagree with you on any of that.
So what do you do then when someone is saying that to this Hamas kid who says, I killed 10 Jews with my bare hands? How do you negotiate with that person? Like, and then is there any regret or second thought before you kill someone like that, before they kill another 10 Jews with their bare hands?
I don't know how to answer that specific question right now, but when I see the critique of this current military operation, this current war, which it is, it reads that just because Israel is involved, that somehow it's not legitimate.
Mine is different. That the one I read is bombing is never the answer. War is never the answer. By war, you only kill and you foment and create more war. And the only way to us to achieve peace is to stop bombing people.
Agree with
It's a lovely idea. I so wish I felt that way.
The crazy thing about war now is that it's so removed from people. Everything becomes numbers, the mass casualties. You bomb buildings, you destroy something so much that it doesn't even look like anything ever lived in it. And war used to be fought with a level of respect and dignity. And I think that's just so indicative of our time that we've lost the reason that everything is so blown out of proportions. I think we forget that. I don't mean that I'm going to backtrack. The reason that this war, or that all wars, are so big is that we forget that that the numbers of people have names and have families. I've said this before on this podcast. Like, it's just become so bird's eye view instead of look how this affects the world. And I know that you can't fight a war thinking about each and every person, but on the other hand, like, you have to think about each and every person. That's diplomacy is keeping it interpersonal. It's keeping relationships going and saying, like, we can figure this out, and like, we can have a conversation, and we might not agree, but we're going to figure it out. And the way that these Air Force driven wars are operating, it's like, okay, we could try that, but or we could just blow up a building, and that's probably be more effective.
There's my favorite album made by a crazy anti-Semite is Roger Waters' album Amused
You're going to say that.
Amused to Death. Came out in the 90s. I listened to a ton in high school, and in there's a song called The Bravery of Being Out of Range. and speaks about that, about how war had become so much easier to wage war and so much easier to cleanse yourself of the horrors of war when you're pushing a button. And look at now that there are, swarms of drones that we can unleash, what that is. But I want to say something else about it, but because I feel like the bigger difference these days, and the biggest difference between, again, spending a significant time in Israel, spending time in the US, is the fact that in Israel, everyone knows someone who's fallen. Everyone knows, everyone serves in the military, except for, of course, the Haredim and the Arabs currently. And everyone, like, the military is not some hypothetical thing that's somewhere out there. The military, you see soldiers around all of the time. When you have kids, you know that they're going to go at 18, they're going to go into the military. It's a basic thing. In the US, not only do we not serve in the military, but most people I know don't know anybody who's in the military. We don't spend any time around the military. We don't see soldiers, and we know nothing about war. And so when we see horrific pictures of, oh my God, this is terrible here, that's war. But it shocks these days because people, I think, here have no vocabulary or context to even talk about what war is. I have another example here. So as you know, there's a lot of pressure on Europe, the EU overall, to spend more money, more percent of their GDP towards actually defending themselves, and the US not doing it. They're trying to raise it, maybe that you should go from 1% to something like 4%. Israel spends about 5% of its GDP on this. And so Germany's trying to do this. And one of the things that Germany tried to do was then to enlist more soldiers. And they polled the German citizenry and said, will you fight for your country? Would you be willing to take up arms in order to fight for your country? And the numbers were dismally low, something like 20%, something like that out of Germans. So, yes. And that the idea that in these, that it is so far removed from us, the idea that we would be willing to give our lives or risk our lives or take up weapons in order to defend and fight for what we believe in and to fight for our country. That's something that in Israel, everyone just knows and assumes. And here, I think that there is, again, a complete and total blind spot when it comes to that.
I think that's true. And I think that is like after October 7th, there was definitely like a renaissance of that notion, like a lot, like tov lamut be'al tzenu, like it's good to die for your country.
Better to live for your country, but yes.
But
you actually help to bring people back from all over the Israelis who are struggling to find flights and come back in order to serve.
But
as is happening right now.
But I also think that, yes, there's like a deep love for the country and a feeling of responsibility. Like, we don't do this and who's going to do it? I also think that maybe for the first time, there's also been a sense of just like people being disenfranchised by the idea of military. They're saying maybe we've been brainwashed into thinking that this is a worthy mantra, and that maybe that's not serving us so much, and maybe we don't want to die for our country. And like we need to rethink that. I think kids seeing their older siblings and the generation above them dying in droves scared them. I think it was less sexy after going to funeral after funeral after funeral. And so it's interesting. Not saying death is sexy. I'm saying that the model of the soldier who's willing to die, who's living in the existential moment of like, am I going to die? Am I going to live? Am I going to love? Am I going to be youthful forever? I think that is something that is being challenged as the state of Israel gets older and new generations come in, and people are seeing that war is not something to idolize, to find to be beautiful, to aspire to be a part of. It's destructive and traumatic.
I think there's a difference between romanticizing military life and having expectations of valor if you're called upon to do so. Like, we don't have to say that war is great or that soldiers are great, but the idea that, like, if my country called me because my country was in immediate peril and asked me to take up arms in order to defend my family, my community, would I be willing to do so? I don't see an erosion around that. Maybe you do, because look, and it's funny because I'm going to be very stereotypical here. a lot of your family friends live around Tel Aviv, and a lot of my family friends do not. And maybe it's even a difference of that, of Tel Aviv being the liberal bastion of, yes, and a lot of my family in Israel being much more,
I think that's an important thing to note.
yes, and even there is a dichotomy, but even in Tel Aviv, there is I think, a greater knowledge, familiarity with the mechanisms of war, what actually happens.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm just hoping that people are going to one day think, maybe war's not such a good idea.
So several years ago, as people know, we have these shinshinim, these teens, Israelis who are here often for the year following high school before they go into the military. And, we've hosted from time to time. And I think 2 or 3 years ago, summer camp ended and there was a shinshin his ticket got canceled. He was stranded. We had him for like 4 or 5 days. His name was Eitan.
Okay.
And Eitan was
You guys always get the stranglers.
Eitan was not a physically fit sort of the model of like what a soldier should look like. And Eitan was great at computer coding, and he helped my wife to get a VPN on her phone and showed her all how to do it. And he liked anime, and he talked to my kids about that. And Eitan is like the guy who sends out the drones to he sends out the David's arrow in order to bring down the missiles coming from Iran. He's that guy. And I will tell you that when the Ayatollah was killed that day, Elle and I turned to each other that morning. We're like, Eitan. I'm sorry, we should not laugh again with anyone's death, but this idea of what it means to be a soldier these days. Eitan, the roly-poly anime lover, is he in this current theater of war.
He's on the front lines.
He's a great white shark in what this has become right now. And that was very strange, just even having that moment and talking about it that way. So let me ask you this. So wars are always easier to start than to end. What's your hope for if you could say your best case scenario for where this resolves, both for the world and also as a Jew, I'm again, my ears are perked up, and often it's the Jew who kind of hears the frequency of danger and incoming. Yeah. I mean, it's a little dehumanizing. I'd rather not be at all the canary in the coal mine, but we have our ears turned to a frequency that often the rest of the world is not quite there. We hear the dog whistles loud and clear and start barking back before anyone else does. Where's your hope for where this goes in the best case scenario?
First of all, hopefully there's not a lot of life lost on any of the sides. Minimal destruction. I hope the people of Iran are able to use the momentum of this moment and whatever life rafts they're going to receive to become free people. Really desperately pray for that for them. I pray that Israel isn't being threatened by impending war constantly. Maybe it will open up opportunity for diplomatic relationships. Who knows?
Especially when Iran bombs all of its Arab neighbors in the first war.
If Iran cannot imagine that Iran's not going to be a major player after this. I believe that they'll probably always be a major player, but I hope that their proxies are weakened. I hope Israelis are safe. I hope that everyone uses caution in advancing in war, and that it ends swiftly, and that there's some kind of redeemable peace at the end. Not even peace. That there's just calm. That there's not going to be another blow up, flare up of this iteration of war.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that, again, going into my two different lenses here, I think a lot of my American non-Jewish friends are blind to the degree to which the Islamic regime of Iran is behind and responsible to so much of the violence and conflict in the Middle East. And I know that there'll be others out there that would say that Israel is the one. I think that, again, that's the mistaking the peace in the quiet.
Yeah.
And I think that since 1979, that Iran has used all of its resources, directed them towards destabilizing the Middle East and towards pursuing a Islamist sort of dream. And that if that was able to go away, then opportunity not just for the Iranians, but for the region. I mean, there's so much that could be done. Um, Iran is about a third the size of the US. I think that Iran it's in the top three for both natural gas and for oil reserves. It has an incredibly educated class with an incredible history. I mean, Iran should be, you know, a first-rate country that I think you and I would both agree. One day, if we could go on vacation to Tehran and go see Jewish sites in Tehran, I mean, and
There used to be there used to be LL flights to Tehran, and there used to be a train between Jerusalem and Tehran. Yeah.
absolutely, through Baghdad along the way. I mean, these things we dream about that kind of future, but that I think that I was reading that the Iranian the rial the currency since 1979 it has gone down 99%. Well, they have all of these resources, and it's just been absolutely in the gutter. And that even though the past 6 months the Iranians revolted, and the government said, "We'll give you $7 more a month." At the same time they did that, the past 6 months, people, again, this is the quiet part people don't know, they've given $1 billion to Hezbollah to rearm and to create new missiles and new militias in southern Lebanon. Um, I mean, again, you have to understand the values of where these people are coming from to make that sort of a choice. No, we're going to starve our own people. In parts of Iran, you can't get water.
You know.
Right, but we're going to send $1 billion to aim missiles at Israel. Um, I that entire way of thinking is just so. It's not just so hurtful to Iran's enemies, but to the Armenians themselves, and that if there could actually be then the cessation of this incredible threat, the opportunities are enormous. Are enormous. I mean, of course, we shouldn't be sort of dreaming about these things. We're naive to the incredible dangers and pressure. But yeah, it makes I think that in Israel you find it's so interesting, such a sense of regard and honor and camaraderie with the Armenian people. I think the idea of there's such parallels in the shared history. For much of world history, living in Iran was the best place Jews could live, especially when fleeing from the Christian Roman Empire. Some of the greatest academies, some of the like our history from around, let's say, 200 to around 1000 CE is centered largely around Mesopotamia and Iran. And I think there's hope one day that could reappear.
Amen. Amen. I really appreciate our conversation. I hope that this war doesn't put Jews around the world at extensive danger. I think that that's maybe the elephant in the room that we didn't discuss, that when Israel wages war, we pay a price, and it's hard, and I'm just praying for safe times for all of us.
I'm going to say one last prayer if I can for this one, and I think it's something I'd love to hear you touch on as well. Another issue and we'll probably get back to this in later podcasts, that has been roiling sort of the Jewish-Israeli world over the past week, is the status of the Kotel, the Western Wall, and this first reading through the Knesset of a law that would bar anything but strict Orthodox observance, including no bat mitzvahs, no women wearing talit, no female rabbis, etc. When you look at the justifications being made around this war, you hear people saying, "Oh my God, in Iran, it is illegal for a woman to show her hair uncovered." But thank God we have Israel with whom we have shared values to partner with.
Yeah.
And when members of the Israeli cabinet are at the same time introducing laws that rival the Iranians, the Ayatollahs, in terms of the level of backwardness, in terms of the shaming of women, to say that a woman wearing a talit at the wall or reading from the Torah can be imprisoned for 7 years. It's scary to see that there are Ayatollah-like elements within Israeli government, within the Israeli population, within the cabinet, and that they sometimes do a great job that in the greatest moments of cohesion between Israel and the outside world, spitting in the face of Jews like us and saying you don't belong, and turning in a very what's the Jewish equivalent of Islamist, of a very,
Extremist Jew.
dangerous
Yeah.
extremist Jew that is for too long been left unchecked in Israel.
To be continued with that one. I have a lot to say, and I will unpack it, but it's not by chance that a lot of liberal rabbis have to leave, or not have to leave, but feel that they're not able to, or not rabbis, liberal Jews feel that they're not able to practice their Judaism freely in a free country. So that's definitely something to think about in the way that we support Israel and the way that we love Israel. And so may Israel remain focused, not too trigger happy, and focused also on what's happening internally.
Yeah, I think to throw in another favorite Gen X reference, I think that in the immortal words of Rambo, from the end of Rambo First Blood,
Yeah, that is
Part 2, which is a classic of yours,
for inside me.
I believe that he says, and they ask, what do you really want, Rambo? He says, all I want is for my country to love me as much as I love it. And I think that for many American Jews, there's often the same feeling when visiting Israel in terms of our authenticity and connection.
All right. Thanks so much.
Okay, you got a movie to watch now.
Yeah. Right after this, when I take my makeup off.
Think of the realism of the military. Go watch Randall, which he gets shot at maybe 10,000 times and doesn't get hit once, but runs off with valor. Anyways.
Good Purim crossing next year.
Okay.
All right.
Purim Sameach. Bye.
Thanks for joining us on In Such a Time. Make sure to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. To learn more about Rabbis Jonathan Jaffe and Leora Londy, or to connect with Temple Bethel of Northern Westchester, visit bethelnw.org, or follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Temple Bethel NW. Thanks for listening.